Still, our office is receiving several calls from companies who have not been paid by Humber Valley. Humber Valley owe them money, and some of them are considering action against government. So, I mean, the decision by government has obviously left government in a position of liability, or potential liability, at least. The Auditor General found that he wasn't satisfied with the fact the contract was cancelled so quickly. And obviously, government put very little thought into the outcomes of cancelling that contract. They were very clearly, in my opinion, they had a singular motivation in cancelling that contract. But it left a number of companies not being paid, and some of those companies are smaller companies who simply can't afford to not be paid by Humber Valley. Some of them are larger companies that can probably withstand the fact that they weren't paid, but obviously, it affects them as a company and their bottom line. And government wanted to protect Humber Valley Paving. They wanted to protect the owners of Humber Valley Paving, but put very little thought into protecting the general public, the general revenues of the province by the potential liability, and certainly no thought into protecting the companies that are still owed money. Yeah,
so I mean, it's an interesting part of the conversation is what's government's role in protecting private-owned businesses and the contractors who are still left wanting money when there's options available for the putting mechanics lien in place. We know all those issues. So I guess, Tom, the overriding question is, what is government's role in protecting the viability of private sector companies, Humber Valley Paving, Humber Valley Resort, or anything else under the sun, including inside the fishery, which we've made a real living at that. So how do we proceed with this?
Well, their role is very clearly articulated in the fact that they had $19 million in bonds that would have been payable to government if government hadn't cancelled the contract and released those bonds. Now, there is a mandatory mechanics lien that is withheld anytime a contract is finished successfully, or anytime a contract is cancelled. The mechanics lien is mandatory, that's held back. So there is some money there, but clearly not enough to satisfy, all of the companies that had not been paid. There's an interesting point here. I mean, as I said, government, very clearly had an obligation through those bonds to ensure that creditors of Humber Valley Paving were protected and to ensure that the job was finished, which it's still not finished. But, there are two bonds. One is a bond for, basically creditors, and the other bond is a bond to ensure that the job is finished, that government is not left holding the bag. But government canceled that contract and went 40 days before they gave any notification that the contract was canceled. And these companies that have been left holding the bag only had 30 days to make a claim against Humber Valley or against government. So, I think there was a great deal of thought put into protecting Humber Valley Paving and the owners of Humber Valley Paving, but very little thought into protecting the taxpayers of the province, where there may be liability against government, and no thought into protecting the creditors of Humber Valley Paving.
I understand, and point taken. Now, the hold and or release in using some bond money, had the government kept it in the fold, is not quite as simple as drawing on bonds to replace subcontractors. It's not quite that simple. I know you know that, but there is certainly a mechanism available to government. Tom, just on a side note, if we're done with that particular issue, what do you make of how the Humber Valley Resort and their attorney is playing this in the public, especially with the type of ads, the style of ads, the things they're saying, the allegations of wrongdoing and or crimes committed by the Premier? Is this helping anybody's case, or are political opposition parties just lapping it up that someone else is doing some what would be unacceptable work by political parties? I find it to be a bit much. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I haven't looked very much into, I've seen the ads placed in the paper and so on, but I haven't followed it. I mean, that's clearly a dispute between that group of individuals and government. So I haven't waded into it for...
But some of it's specifically to do with the Premier himself and the way he has approached electioneering. I mean, it's absolutely accused him of committing crime. So I just wonder if you had a take on it, not to get into the political aspect necessarily, because this is really an attack on one person and some other police officers. I find it to be pretty intense, to be honest with you, for public negotiations. Just curious if you had a perspective to offer on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some serious allegations there, but I think that's where, the Commissioner for Members' Interests will have to decide. I mean, that's not for me to decide whether the allegations are correct or not correct, or whether there's validity to those allegations. I think that's something that the Commissioner for Members' Interests is going to have to decide at the Chief Electoral Office.
What about the whole rebrand? Now, some of this is part and parcel associated with not only the Premier and how he campaign fundraise and all that kind of stuff, but all of the vitriol surrounding the new Department of Justice, or the rebranding, or the change of focus, however it remains to be seen what's the appropriate characterization. But what do you have to say about that kind of stuff? Is it the unbelievably dangerous slippery slope, as some people position it, or your perspective on that change?
Well, I think you made a valid point in your opening remarks this morning, Paddy, that, had government taken public safety and made it a very, a cornerstone, opened a division, or, even added it to the name of the Department of Justice and Public Safety. But, justice is a cornerstone itself of our democracy and the way government operates, and to take less focus on the Department of Justice. I think the Canadian Bar Association make a valid point as well, that this is every province in the country now, except for our province, has a Department of Justice. The federal government has a Department of Justice, and there's a good reason for that, because it is a cornerstone of how our society and how our government and how our democracy operates. I was Minister of Justice as well, and I agree there should be a strong focus, especially, with some of the crimes and what we're seeing in society. There should be a strong focus on public safety, but I don't think we need to diminish the focus on justice.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone will agree there should be any other real serious top mandate focus of justice outside of what was the focus of the department when it was referred to as the Department of Justice. I mean, this might be politically naive as opposed to presenting the slippery slope as some people characterize it. I appreciate your time this morning, Tom. Anything else you want to say in summary?
No, I appreciate the time as well, and I got other topics. I've been threatening to call you all week because there are 2 or 3 other topics, so I expect to hear from you next week. I look forward to that as well.
And I will appreciate your time again then, sir. Have a nice weekend. Happy Thanksgiving.
Excellent. Thanks, Paddy.
All the best. Bye-bye.